Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to some more supernatural urban legends or paranormal urban legends. They come under both really, I guess. The next story is called Cowhead. A teacher in China was travelling with his students on a school trip in the mountains above the town where they lived. It was a long journey and the students, who had grown bored and restless, started to play up. So the teacher suggested that they should tell each other stories. He joined in and told them several spooky tales, but soon kept them quiet as the night drew in. Then the bus driver asked him if he'd ever heard of a very old story known as Cowhead. The teacher looked shocked and went quiet for a moment. He told the driver that he had heard of the story, but didn't know how it ended. Besides, he had heard that it was too frightening for children. Some said that people who had merely listened to the tale had lost their minds, and there were even rumours that it had taken lives. The bus driver smiled to himself, but the children overheard their conversation and were soon clamouring to hear the Cowhead story. The teacher reasoned that it couldn't do any real harm, as he didn't know the whole story anyway. He could make it up as he went along. He started to tell the tale of a government official who had arrived to take a census in a remote village in the mountainside many decades ago. The last census had suggested that there should have been several hundred citizens there, but the place was completely deserted. The only signs of life were the bones of animals scattered in the dust. The official found the place unnerving and travelled to the next settlement, a long way over a mountain's pass, where he asked what happened to the villagers. They said that nobody knew for sure, but there were rumours that they went mad and ate each other during a terrible famine. The official called in colleagues from the government to investigate. Amongst the animal skeletons, they found the strange remains of a man with what appeared to be the head of a cow. Locals said that the man had seemed perfectly normal when he first arrived in the village, but he had brought a terrible curse down upon them. At this point in the narration, the children on the bus started to cry and asked the teacher to stop telling the story. But something had come over him. He was no longer in control, and he continued with the tale as though in a trance, staring dead ahead. The children were trying to cover their ears, and some started to foam at the mouth. They attempted to move from their seats, but their arms were pinned down by their sides. The teacher continued to recite the story with a blank look in his eyes, a tale that became more horrific with every word. The last thing the children remembered before they passed out was a look in their teacher's eyes. When a passing driver came upon the bus many hours later, the teacher and all the students were still unconscious. It took days for them to come around, but the teacher was found to be in a deep coma from which he never recovered. The bus driver was never seen again. None of the children on the bus who heard the Cowhead tale would ever dare to recite it, not even to each other. The next story is Prime Real Estate. A large, pretty family house in Amityville, New York, had a secret, and that's why it has remained empty for decades, despite a local property boom. In 1974, a man murdered his entire family in the house, shooting his wife and 3 small children with a hunting rifle as they slept. At his trial, the defense tried to get him to be declared insane, as he claimed that he was being controlled by strange voices in his head belonging to previous occupants of the house who had told him to commit the crime. The experts, however, did not agree that he was mad. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder, and he was given 4 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each life he had taken. The house lay empty for a year, as the family's relatives couldn't bear to even set foot in the place. They finally sold it way under market price to a young family from out of town who had never heard about the murders. When neighbours finally told them, they pretended that they weren't bothered, but certain things started to make sense, as they had been plagued with problems since moving in. The water ran red from the taps and mysteriously foul-smelling black gunk oozed from the toilets. The father found strange marks in the door frames, which looked to him like the imprint of a small child's teeth, but his own children denied any knowledge. Each of the family members reported hearing the sound of music at night from an unknown source, and, strangest of all, their youngest daughter became obsessed with a demonic imaginary friend that she described as a pig. The parents didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but the kids refused to go upstairs at night, so they called in a priest to perform an exorcism. They told themselves it was just to reassure the kids that the house was safe. The priest was relaxed and friendly when he arrived, but he became noticeably disturbed after blessing the upstairs rooms and left before performing a full exorcism. He told them that, although the house was not haunted, on no account should anyone sleep in the third bedroom. They were very sceptical, but they locked the door so that no one could get in. The happenings did continue, but the family were too proud to move. Who would buy the place anyway? The final straw came when the young mother was woken by dark red liquid dripping from the ceiling of the bedroom. The family moved out to a motel that very night. They'd lasted 6 weeks. Nobody in the neighbourhood was surprised. Some had even commented on how the new owner looked remarkably similar to the murderer, and joked darkly that he had escaped just in time to save his family. The next story is Lake Ronkonkoma. Ronkonkoma. Oof, that's a name and a half, isn't it? Lake Ronkonkoma in New York State is an ancient and extremely deep lake that has been linked to many tragic stories. It's often claimed that someone has drowned there every year, as far back as records sort of begin. There was once a tribe of Native Americans living on the shores of the lake, at the mouth of the river, and a rival tribe was based on the opposite side. The princess of one tribe fell in love with the prince from another, and once the elders found out, she was forbidden to ever cross the river. Never mind see her prince again. The two tribes have been warring for decades, and there was much bad blood between them to risk a union. Young love being quite what it is, the prince and princess took a dugout canoe one night and escaped into the lake. They didn't have a plan, but they wanted to be together. They had not been paddling for long when the wind suddenly grew into a monstrous storm, and the surface of the lake was whipped into great waves. They held on to the canoe for dear life as the water around them surged into a foaming whirlpool. They were dragged down to the bottom of the lake in a tragic embrace. Afterwards, the elders told the youths of both tribes about the pair, explaining that the lake spirits did not agree with the union, and that is why they had taken those young lives. Despite the stories associated with it, the beautiful lake still draws young people to its shores every summer. They paddle boats out into the middle and dare each other to dive into cool waters. Every year someone fails to surface, always someone who is in a loving relationship, and the body's never recovered. The story goes that they are cursed by the tragic Native American princess, who, jealous of her victim's happiness, drags them down into the deep depths. The next story is called The Black Lady of the Woods. A local newspaper in Lincolnshire, England, published images taken by a girl who had been walking with her cousin in the woods near her home. She told the paper they had been playing around with a camera in the dark, taking pictures of her cousin, who was an aspiring model, and didn't see anybody else around. But when the girls looked at the photographs a couple of days later on a computer, they saw that they had captured strange shadows in the trees, the floating figures of mysterious people and ghostly faces in the darkness. The girls didn't really believe in ghosts, but after a little research on the history of the woods, they knew exactly what they had captured. The Black Lady of the Woods. Hidden in the undergrowth is an abandoned stone cottage near a pond, where in the 17th century a poor gamekeeper lived with his wife and son, or so the story goes. After the outbreak of the English Civil War, he was forced into fighting for his master, who supported the king, and marched off to battle. He told his wife that he would return within 6 months, but he never did, and she took to wandering the woods to look for him. One Christmas, a band of Roundheads fighting the king rode through the forest on horseback. Identifying the land as enemy territory, they claimed the wood and everything in it, including the gamekeeper's cottage. They stole everything the wife had, including a young son, and burned the house. It was said that the woman died of grief, and from that day on, people have claimed to see a lady, hunched over and crying, dressed in a black cloak and a hood, wandering the woods, looking for a missing husband and child. It's believed that she can still be seen in the forest to this day, and if you walk in the woods at Christmas time and utter the words, Black lady, I've stolen your baby, 3 times, she will appear in front of you. The next story is Betsy's Voice. Boy Scouts on camping trips tell their rookie recruits a story that dates back to the early days of scouting after World War II. In a forest surrounding an abandoned airfield, there was an old house where scouts would play hide and seek. The place had been bought cheaply by a young couple, Betsy and her husband Johnny, before the war. They hoped to renovate it and make it their perfect family home. Betsy was an aspiring singer whose career was cut short by the outbreak of the war. She was driving down the track from the house one night when a truck full of soldiers coming back from the pub came the other way. They were making a racket, completely inebriated and distracting the driver. He took his eyes off the road for a moment to tell him to pipe down, just long enough to veer into Betsy's path, crashing head first into her car and killing her instantly. Her body was so badly disfigured that the police wouldn't let her husband, Johnny, say goodbye to her. She was identified only by a large diamond ring he had given her, a family heirloom. Johnny buried the ring with her, devastated, and moved to another country, letting the house go to ruin. Many years later, the house was discovered by a group of scouts on the hike through the forest from their camp. It seemed like the perfect place to light a campfire, play games, tell creepy stories. But it was not to be an idyllic Boy Scout adventure. The first thing they noticed was a female voice joining them in songs around the fire, which was odd, because back then, girls weren't allowed in the Scouts. Above the crackling of the flames, they heard her again, and it sounded as if she was inside the house. Finally, they saw her, initially looking out of the windows and then walking round the campfire, a terribly disfigured girl in a pretty dress. Then Betsy was gone. The next morning, one of the boys could not be woken. His mates were horrified to discover that he was dead, and the only signs of injury suffered were some nasty scratches on his face. Betsy did it, cried one of the boys when he saw the body, and after some coaxing by people, he recounted what had happened in the night. Betsy had returned to pay the lads a visit in the small hours and woken two of the boys with her singing. She asked them one by one if they thought she had a beautiful voice. The first boy had been too scared to answer, and an angry Betsy slashed him across the face with a diamond ring, saying that once he fell asleep, he would never wake up again. Then she asked the other boy the same question, and without hesitation, he told her that she did indeed have a beautiful voice. So Betsy smiled and disappeared into the woods, singing all the way. The terrified boys tried to stay awake, but eventually they both fell asleep. Only one of them woke in the morning. To this day, scouts are told, listen out for Betsy around the campfire and tell her what she wants to hear. She always wanted to be a singer, but she never liked critics. The next story is Milk Bottles. Two old men ran a general store in a small town in the American Midwest. The Depression had hit and business was hard. The customers stopped visiting and soon only a few regulars were keeping them afloat. One day a young woman dressed all in white entered the store, carrying an empty milk bottle. She placed it on the counter and one of the men filled it with milk from the churn, asking for 10 cents in return. The girl, who had a sad look in her eyes, did not reply. Instead, she picked up the bottle and quietly left the store. The man was too surprised to say anything, and when he followed her out of the shop, she was nowhere to be found. He went back inside, muttering to himself that she probably was a migrant from a city who didn't know how things worked out here. He told his partner what happened and to watch out for her. The next day she returned, again carrying an empty milk bottle. This time he told her that he knew that times were hard, but she had to pay like everybody else. He filled the bottle from the churn, but again she ignored him and walked out with the milk. On this occasion, however, the two men were ready, and they followed her through the town. She moved quickly, and they could barely keep up. But they saw that she headed for a church and stopped in front of a gravestone, where she disappeared. The two men couldn't believe their eyes, but they figured they couldn't both be seeing things. Then they heard the sound of a baby crying close by, but they couldn't see anybody. They realised that the noise was coming directly from the gravestone where the woman had vanished into thin air. They returned with shovels from the store, informing the sheriff on their way, and as they dug into the grave, the crying got louder. When they lifted the coffin out and opened it, they found a live baby inside, next to the woman from the store, who was clearly dead, and two empty milk bottles. Geesh, that's really creepy. I mean, yeah, that's a bit creepy, that. Imagine hearing a baby cry, and you know that it's crying, it's coming from a grave, only to dig it up and find that it's actually alive. That's just bizarre to me. Anyway, those are the rest of the paranormal urban legends. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.